Okay, it looks like we're good to go. Thank you everyone for coming tonight. Welcome to the Naturalist Exchange. Unfortunately, Christy couldn't be here. She had another obligation, but I am Maggie. I'm the program assistant, and I'll be around. So we have today with us Joellen Lampman, who is a master naturalist from Albany County, and she also works there with Cornell Cooperative Extension as an integrated pest management extension specialist. So thank you, Joellen, for coming tonight, and we'll have a section at the end for questions if you guys have some. So feel free to take it away.
Absolutely. People always have questions. So first I want to apologize for needing to postpone 2 weeks ago. I actually had surgery that was really quickly scheduled, so I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to speak on Monday, and it's just as well that we did postpone this. So thank you for your patience. I'm going to share my presentation. Get started. So I always like to, whoops, no. Okay, I like to start off with this picture of myself. This is me in the woods down in Dutchess County, and I am holding a field mouse, and I am blowing the fur, looking for ticks on it. And if you had told me 20 years ago that this is what I would be doing with my life, I would have said you were nuts. I am an environmental educator. I have been all of my life. And I actually spent 17 years working with land-based businesses like universities and golf courses to help them to be more environmental with their land management. And from there, I actually had this opportunity to join Cornell with the New York State Integrated Pest Management Program. So I'm bringing my environmental education skills to this position where I get to talk about food, water, shelter, and space with critters that actually share our homes with us. So that can be very exciting and help people see environmentalism in a different way. But ticks really kind of took over my life as a topic that I've spent a lot of time researching and educating about. And I like it because as opposed to looking at bed bugs, I get to be outdoors looking at that ecology, which I definitely prefer. And I also call this my credibility slide because there is so much information out there about ticks and so much of it is incorrect. So this is an opportunity for me to share with you the science-based, research-based information, and hopefully then you can go forward and be able to provide that information when you're asked about it too. So we'll just start with basic biology. People really don't understand the different arthropods, so I usually start off a presentation by asking which one is the tick, and people, well, most of the time we're going to be able to say, hey, yeah, it's the one on the left. And I ask them why, and we get to 8 legs and 2 body parts, and so people are okay with that. And then I ask them what the one on the right is, and very few people actually know that that is a bed bug. But then we get to talk about the difference between arachnids and bed bugs, or insects, and that has 6 legs and 3 body parts. And then I show them the picture in the middle, which is actually also a tick, but this is what a tick looks like when it first comes out of the egg, and it only has 6 legs. So that's kind of important for people to know from an identification standpoint if you have a very good magnifying lens with you, because these things are pretty small to be able to see that with your naked eye. Now, there are about 1,000 ticks worldwide. Some of them are hard ticks, and those are most of the ones that we're familiar with. There are also soft ticks, and I'll show you a picture of that later, that pretty much live just in nests or in animal burrows, and they never really leave that location. Here in New York, there's about 15 different species of ticks, and only 3 of them, possibly 4, human health concerns. Yeah. So that's
I tried.
That's the American dog tick. We got the Lone Star tick, and the black-legged tick, also known erroneously as the deer tick. So when people, I'm going to use black-legged tick, but when you hear people talk about deer ticks, we're talking about the same thing. So the American dog tick, if you're of a certain age like I am, this is the one that we grew up with. They are large compared to the other ticks. Usually it's only the adults that we're going to see got on ourselves or on our own companion animals. And on us, they really like to be up here along the hairline, and we would often find them attached on the neck or above. They can survive for 2 years without ever feeding. They're very, very hardy. Typically, when we hear where are you going to avoid to get ticks, we're going to hear tall grass. That's because that's where these dog ticks really like to hang out. So we're going to find them along grassy fields and trails. And their primary hosts are going to be dogs, medium-sized mammals, and livestock, and of course us, if they can grab onto us. The one that people are less familiar with is the Lone Star tick. So I will admit to growing up on Long Island, and as a child, all that we saw were dog ticks. And then when I was a teenager was when the black-legged ticks really started to make an appearance. Now on Long Island, the Lone Star tick is what you're going to find most often. Partly that's because the female lays more eggs. So your average black-legged tick is going to lay around 2,000. A Lone Star tick female can lay up to 8,000 eggs at a time. They're also way more aggressive. You typically can feel them biting you more than you can with our other tick species. We're also going to find them in forest or fields. They are very attractive to carbon dioxide, and they will actually come and search you out. So if I was going to go down to Long Island and I was going to be looking for these ticks, the first places that I would head would be along roadsides and along parking lots because they've just been attracted to the carbon dioxide that's coming out of the vehicles there. Their hosts, their favorite hosts are deer and turkey, but they will also get on companion animals, on livestock, and on other types of wildlife, medium-sized, and of course, people. And then there's the black-legged tick, and for most of New York, this is the one that is of the greatest concern. We're going to find it in the largest numbers. The highest risk of being bitten by these are going to be in the spring and the fall. And something that's pretty unique to these guys is that they need really high humidity. So they need it to be above 80% to really thrive. So that's why we're going to most often find them in woodland areas, shady areas, areas that have higher moisture. In New York, they're found on over 120 hosts. 120 hosts nationwide. In New York, there's about 27 different species that they're going to regularly feed on. And I'll spend a little bit more time talking about that later. And then we have our new arrival. This is the Asian longhorn tick. So this was discovered in New Jersey in 2017, and it was discovered on a sheep farm. And basically the sheep farmer came out and she had ticks crawling up her legs and her sheep were covered, and she called Rutgers University, which is their equivalent of Cornell. And they came out, they were not quite sure what they were looking at. So they did some genetic testing and they were able to identify that these were indeed Asian longhorn ticks. We're still not sure how they got here. They either came directly from Asia or they possibly also came in on livestock or on companion animals from New Zealand or Australia, where they've been incredibly invasive for a while now. So 2017, they treated the sheep, they treated the farm, hoped that was it. They came back in the spring of 2018, and lo and behold, they found them all over the place. So now those of us that look for ticks, we started looking all over the place, and we discovered that they've actually been here for a while. We found them in 12 states, 6 counties in New York, and you can kind of see that on this map that I show, primarily downstate New York. We're going to find them in woods, fields. They've been found in lawns. They're just amazing hitchhikers. So we
I'm muting it, but
to spread pretty quickly. And again, their favorite hosts seem to be deer, but they will also find them on medium-sized animals and livestock, where they can be a real issue. The other thing that's really unique about this particular tick is that it is parthenogenic, which means that the female can clone herself. She can lay up to 2,000 viable eggs. So that's a little scary. We don't need to have a male and a female to start a population. So we're expecting this to really spread very quickly throughout New York, unfortunately. And then this year, there were 2 additional ticks that were found in the states next to us. So the Gulf Coast tick was discovered a population in Connecticut, just east of the border. So we're expecting that if they have a population in Connecticut, they're probably in New York. And then we also have the bat tick, which was just discovered. And this is a soft tick. And you can see that it looks different. It doesn't have that same shield on it that the other hard ticks do. In fact, they look very much like we would say an engorged tick that's filled with blood would look like. And so it was discovered for the first time. We don't know what this means. We don't know if it's throughout New York. We don't know if this is yet another thing that's going to impact our bat populations. The research has really just started because we didn't know that they were here. So more to come on these 2 ticks. So let's get back to talking about the ones that we know are here. And I am going to focus on the black-legged tick just because it's the one that's most prevalent around here. So these guys are very, very good at what they do. They've been around since the dinosaurs. They are masters of stealth. So they are very small creatures that have even smaller feet and they walk on their toes. So you really can't count on feeling one crawling on you. Sometimes you get lucky and they might pluck a hair and hit a nerve there. But for the most part, the reason that they are so successful is that they can get on and not have their host feel them. Those legs are made for crawling and for clutching. So the good news is they're not jumping. They can't fly. I'm so grateful for that. And they also don't drop from trees. So you've got those legs there, and right on this part of the leg here is what's called the Hellas organ. And that is where they're sensing things. So they're sensing carbon dioxide, heat. So they're kind of feeling out for there. They don't have functional eyes. So if they were to take all their energy and climb up the tree and walk out on a branch, they have no senses that would help them to land on something. So basically what they are doing is they are questing, where they are going up to the top of vegetation, they're clutching on with the back 3 pairs of legs, and then those front 2 pairs of legs are out there, and they're waiting for a host to go by so that they can grab onto it and then figure out where on that host it wants to spend the next few days feeding on its blood. And typically this isn't going to be very high. It's going to be ground level to usually no more than 1.5 feet up on the foliage. So that lets us know for ourselves that if we want to protect ourselves, we really need to focus from the knee down. As I mentioned, Lone Star ticks are much more likely to come and hunt you down. So I was down on Long Island on a golf course and I saw a bunch of turkeys. So I went looking in that particular area for them. And yes, indeed, I did run into a hatch of Lone Star tick larvae. And what you'll often find with the larvae is that the females will drop off and they will lay their eggs and they will all hatch at the same time. So they're all in a very small cluster. So especially with Lone Star ticks, you're usually not going to get one. You can get thousands of them on you at any one time. So you can see this is my lower calf here, and I've got them all on this area. I also have them up higher up on the back of my leg. And the best way to get them off is with a lint roller to get those multiple larvae off of you. So how are we going to protect ourselves based on this behavior? Well, one thing that we could do is we can dress accordingly. As you saw in the previous picture, I was wearing light colored clothing so I could see the ticks on me. So I'm going to wear light colored clothing. I'm going to tuck those pants into my socks because that means that when they get on me on the outside, they can't get onto the inside of my pants and start crawling up. And then I won't be able to see them. They have to crawl up the top of my leg, and I will hopefully be able to see them as I'm walking along and doing my thing and out in the woods. So this is what that looks like. So here's my pants tucked into my socks. I look down and here comes a black-legged tick adult walking up, and I can capture it. If that pant leg had not been tucked in, that tick would have been underneath my pant legs. And they really like warm, moist areas to settle in and take their blood meal. So on people, you can kind of imagine where that is. And so we want to protect that middle area so that that's not an area where they're going to be able to embed themselves and be able to feed. And we can inspect ourselves throughout the day if we have ourselves protected. So this is a black-legged tick nymph, and it's crawling on a white flag that I had used to collect it. And you can see it's not moving particularly fast, so you have time to see if one is crawling up your leg. It's also not so slow that your eye might not catch the movement if you're looking out for it. So this is just something that you can do to protect yourselves from those questing ticks that start down really low by the ground and then they crawl up. A next level protection that we can do for these questing ticks is to use repellents. And what repellents do is they interfere with that sensory organ so that they don't see us or our companion animals, if we protect them, as hosts. So right now there are 4 products on the market that we know work for ticks. And that is DEET, picaridin, IR3535, and oil of lemon eucalyptus. And these all work for different lengths of time. They all have different instructions on them. Even DEET might, one product might say, do not put on clothing, especially synthetic clothing, because it will melt it. Others say that you can put it on clothing. So it's really important to make sure that when you buy any of these products that you read that bottle, get out your magnifying lens and read the small print. It's going to give you an indication also of how long it's going to last, because some of them might only last for an hour. Like oil of lemon eucalyptus typically doesn't last that long for ticks. It might only last an hour. So if you're not going to reapply a repellent every hour, then this is not the repellent for you. So you might want to go with a stronger, higher percentage of DEET, but we have found that for both DEET and picaridin, going up above 30% isn't going to do you any good. So don't go and get the 75% to 100% DEET because it's not going to give you any longer protection. All right, so what else do we know about ticks? They are incredibly small. So this is, again, the black-legged tick. From left to right, we have the 6-legged larva that comes out of the egg. It is so small it almost fits in the groove of a fingerprint. The one next to it, to the right, is a black-legged tick nymph. This is the size of a poppy seed. And then the two to the far right are the adult male and the adult female. And they're much larger and people are more likely to see them and not allow them to get attached. So it's the smaller ones that we're really concerned about. And speaking of those larvae, they are so small, they can actually get themselves through the weave of a sock. So something that's really relevant if you're not on Long Island and you have Lone Star tick larvae that you're dealing with, they can make their way through there. So the way that we recommend that you deal with that is with permethrin treated clothing. And there's two ways that you can do this. You can buy the permethrin. Typically sporting goods stores are going to have this in the hunting section, and you can spray your own clothing, or you can buy pre-treated clothing or send your clothes out to be professionally treated. The treatment that you do yourself can last for 6 weeks or 6 washes, whichever comes first. And the ones that are professionally treated can last, they say, up to 70 washes. There is some indication that for Lone Star ticks, it only lasts for 35 washes. So that's a decision you need to make depending on what ticks you might be exposed to. And this can work really well. This was a research project that was done where they were looking at summer clothing. So this isn't even the long pants that we're recommending. So they had treated a t-shirt, shorts, socks, and the sneakers. And you can see on the left that the untreated clothing, they actually put ticks onto graduate students and saw what would happen. And they made sure that these were ticks that were raised in a lab, so they didn't have any disease pathogens within them, to see which ones would embed. Being a graduate student is great. On the right, we've got the treated t-shirts, shorts, socks, and sneakers, and you can see that it really reduces the number of them that do get attached, especially around that groin area that we really don't want them to be. It's still not the best, so combining the permethrin treated clothing with long clothing is going to make a big difference in protecting yourself. And just with any pesticide, you just want to make sure, again, that you get out your magnifying glass and you follow those label directions. It's going to tell you to take them outside on a non-windy day, spray them down just until the cloth changes color. You don't need to soak them, and wait until they dry. And once it's dried, the product has bound to the clothing, and that's why it's locked in, and you can get them wet. It's the washing that is going to slowly degrade it, and after 6 washes, it doesn't work anymore. All right, we also know that ticks are incredibly committed. As I mentioned, once they find that dark, warm place, they want to stick around. For adults, up to 7 days, where they're just filling themselves up with blood. There's a larvae, and the nymphs will do it for less days. So a larvae might actually only be on you for 2 days, where a nymph might be on for 3 or 4 days. And they are committed. This is a close-up look of their mouth part, and they mean business. Those are barbs that's going to lock that into you. And in addition to this physical anchoring that it has, it's also releasing in its saliva a cementing agent that is going to allow it to not be easily shifted for the up to a week that it wants to be there. In its saliva, it is also releasing anticoagulants and histamine so that you don't have an allergic reaction to it, painkillers so you don't feel this happening to you. There's actually about 1,000 different proteins that are in tick saliva. Most of them, we have no idea what they do. If you want to know what ticks are good for, there's actually some indication that some of those proteins could be used for medicinal help, and there are some people that are researching it. Now, I wanted to show you a part of this video, and I would encourage you to watch the whole thing at some point. But I'm just going to show a brief portion.
The body is all mouth. It digs into us using 2 sets of hooks. The hooks wriggle into the skin. They pull our flesh out of the way and push in this mouth part, the hypostome. Those hooks anchor the tick to us for the long haul, like mini harpoons. While the speedy mosquito digs.
So it's actually creating a pool of your blood that it will then drink in during that period of time. Sorry about that. I think ticks are incredibly cool. I love studying them. Ticks also need hosts. So as I had mentioned before, there's 27 hosts in New York that they will regularly attach to, and here's a representative sample. And I apologize for the fuzziness of the rabbit picture. I actually took that this spring. I had my telephoto lens on, and this rabbit was so close, and you could just see that cluster of ticks that are engorged on this poor thing.
Joellen, you may have to re-screen share because we're still seeing, I think, the YouTube page.
All right, so let me stop that share.
There we go.
Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, and I saw that there was a chat. I don't see that, Maggie, so if there's a question, if you could let me know.
Yeah, of course, definitely.
Great. So anyway, the aforementioned poor rabbit with the ticks on its neck, ticks on birds. I have a couple on here that people think that these are going to save the world from ticks. So let me just throw that out there, and you can write it into the chat, or you can just unmute yourself and say which animal here eats a lot of ticks.
The guinea hen.
So I heard guinea hen.
Someone in the chat said possum. Someone else said possum.
And there was actually a research project that was done that showed that when you put a bunch of ticks on animals, that the possum was the most likely to find those ticks and eat them off. So there's been this huge Save the Possum campaign because they're going to save us from ticks. And I'm not going to tell you not to save the possums because possums are also incredibly cool animals. But we do know now that, yes, if you put a possum in a cage, it's going to eat most of the ticks off of it. But when they go out and they collect possums in the wild, there's plenty of ticks that are still on them. They were just too busy doing other stuff to bother grooming themselves as well as they might in a small cage. Guinea hens are often touted as, get guinea hens and you're not going to have any ticks on your yard. And that research actually comes out of Africa for a different species of tick that was solely on cattle. So when they released the chickens in with the cattle, the chickens ate all of the ticks off of them, and it was great, and this is fantastic for reducing pesticide use and the pest itself. Unfortunately, our ticks aren't one-host ticks. There's 27 things that they're very happy to get on and feed on in New York, including guinea hens. So we find that releasing chickens it's a wash. So they'll eat ticks, but they'll also get ticks. And over the long term, we don't see any reductions of ticks when we do that under research studies. Unfortunately, I would love to be able to give you reasons to piss off your neighbors and get loud guinea hens, but I can't. White-tailed deer often are brought up, and indeed they are the favorite host of adult black-legged ticks, Lone Star ticks, and Asian longhorn ticks. So one of the things that we have yet to determine is there's only so much room on that deer's ear for ticks. So as Lone Star ticks increase, as Asian longhorn ticks increase, are we going to see decreases in black-legged ticks because they're just going to be outcompeted by these other ticks? We don't have an answer to that yet. It's something that we're curious about, but if you're just exchanging one tick for another tick, is that really a benefit? That's another whole question that I can't answer. But we do find, especially with black-legged ticks, that females are much more successful at laying more viable eggs when they have had their last meal on deer blood. So this is something that we usually consider when we're looking at managing ticks. Deer populations definitely come into it because deer are really the cruise ships for these ticks. It's an all-you-can-eat buffet. They're traveling to exotic places because they have such large ranges and ample opportunities to find a mate so that they can have sex and be able to reproduce and be able to lay all those eggs. And research has shown that a single deer can account for 500,000 ticks, and I've seen number up to 1.5 million ticks, depending on how many ticks get on it and how many eggs they lay. And that's going to also be determined by what species it is. Lone star ticks just lay more eggs than black-legged ticks. They have no role in Lyme disease because that bacteria doesn't build up in the tick body. So even if every single one of those ticks that's feeding on that deer was carrying the pathogen for Lyme disease and injecting it into the deer is not building that up in its bloodstream so that if a different tick bit it, that it would pick up the pathogen from the tick. So it's a dead-end host. And ironically, so are people. And that's one of the reasons that it's so hard to test for the Lyme disease pathogen, because it doesn't build up in great numbers in human bodies. But boy, it can knock the snot out of us. The real problem, host problem that we have with ticks is the white-footed mouse, field mouse, Paramiscus species. They're present in forest fragments and in the suburbs. We can find in certain areas that over 90% are infected with the pathogen that causes Lyme disease, and about 50 of them can be infected with other pathogens as well. So these little critters just go along doing their mouse thing. That research project that I mentioned earlier, where they took ticks and they put it on different types of hosts and then they saw what would happen. 50% of the ticks that were put onto Paramiscus mice were able to fully engorge and drop off and be ready to lay their eggs at the right time, as compared to the possum, where we had about 10% of those ticks were able to go on and be able to go on with their life cycle. So the ticks are incredibly successful on the mice because they're terrible groomers. They basically have, they want to eat, they want to have sex, and that's their life cycle. So these white-footed mice have really thrived where people are. And so as an integrated pest management specialist, if I could tell you how to reduce these in on your property, I would, but I can't because we just don't know. They litter young, they have lots of young, and they breed multiple times a year, and they carry these mice and they can carry these diseases within their bodies, and it doesn't seem to affect them because their lives are so short. And they're incredibly flexible. They eat a lot of seeds, nuts, acorns, fruit, our garbage. Basically, they just love being in our areas and being able to thrive where people are. And all of those hosts need food. And there's a phenomenon that we often see, that we have a mast year, which 2019 was a mast year where we had the oak trees and other nut trees that just release a ton of seeds. And they're trying to get balance out with what eats them. So they will release a lot of seeds in one year. The following year, there will be a ton more of the things that feed on it, especially rodents. And then those populations will start to decline because those oak trees aren't releasing as many acorns. And then that population will decline. And then 7 years later, typically the oak trees will have another mast year, and then that'll jump up the rodent population, and then it'll decline, and so on and so forth. So Rich Osfeld out of the Bolingbrook Institute for Ecosystem Health has been able to document this, that we have a mast year. The following year, we see a huge population in rodents. And I don't know about you, but people have just been exclaiming of how many chipmunks there are this year. And I know I've certainly seen that myself. And then the following year, those things that feed on the rodents, including parasites like ticks, really increase. So I'm telling you right now, 2021 is going to be a really bad tick year. You heard it here first. And ticks are very seasonal. So the eggs are laid in the spring, and in the summertime, those larvae are going to hatch. They're going to look for something to feed on, and typically, because they're really small, they're down in the leaf litter, it's going to be a small mammal. And then they're going to wait. They're going to wait out the fall, the winter, and then in the springtime is when the nymphs emerge, and they're going to look for something to feed on again. So that's meal number 2. And then they're going to wait out the summer and the fall, and then they're going to look for that final host with the female feeding. Males sometimes feed, or they might just take a sip or two, but they're not really big into feeding. They are looking to mate with the females. And then the females wait out the rest of the fall, the winter, and then in the spring they're going to lay their eggs, and at that point the females are going to die. That's what it looks like in the textbooks. This is what it looks like in reality. So it really depends on the year. So I have found larvae in May, which meant that had hatched out in August, and it had lasted the rest of the summer, fall, winter, spring. It had just been able to find a place where it could just hang out, look for its energy, and then it started questing, which is why I was able to collect it. More unusual than adult ticks, which are going to become active any day now. I was actually out today and I didn't find any adults. I did find larvae, so they are still very active. In fall, the adults are going to become very active, and if they do not find a host, they are going to continue to be active throughout the winter time and into the spring. As long as it is above 37 degrees, the ticks can be out there questing. So those warm winter days, the last thing you're thinking about is ticks. You actually need to really be considering looking for ticks. Typically they're going to die out because they will finally run out of energy, especially if it's hot and dry. Dryness is really the black-legged tick's biggest enemy. So this spring, we thought we were going to have an early spring, and then it shut down, so they kind of hung out for a while. Summer, it's been very, very dry. So when we got those spurts of rain, that allowed the nymphs that had kind of just been hunkered down because it was too dry for them to be active. They came out later in the summertime because it became moist enough for them to be able to be active. So there could certainly be poppy-sized nymphs that are active right now. You just need to really watch. But the next big population activity that we're going to see is the adults. And the different tick species have different activities. So this is textbook what you're supposed to say. Here in October, the black-legged ticks or nymphs are going to become really active. We're not seeing dog ticks, Lone Star ticks. With the Asian longhorn ticks, we are seeing the larvae that are going to be active typically into November. People still think of ticks as a summer issue, and I think that has a lot to do with the dog tick. And now with the Lone Star tick, those are going to be mostly active in the summertime. But with the black-legged tick, you're going to see the most activity in the springtime and in the fall. How did that happen? Okay. So we also know that ticks transmit pathogens. So them feeding on our blood is, ugh, who needs it? Kind of disgusting. But the pathogens is, of course, what really has caused this human health interest. And the way that this works, for the most part, is that the bacteria are going to be ingested, and they're going to just hang out in the gut. And they're going to go dormant, like the tick almost goes dormant at waiting all those months before it's going to feed again. And then when the tick starts feeding, and the blood hits it, the pathogens are going to wake up, they're going to start reproducing, and they're going to move from the gut, and they're going to move through the tick. And as the tick feeds, it's taking in all of the blood, and what it's really interested is in the solid, so it's going to start spitting back out the excess fluid back in to the host, and that's when the pathogens get transferred from the tick into the host itself. And, you know, tick-borne pathogens are something that we're just learning about a lot. You can see here that, you know, from the first one that was ever discovered was 1910 with Rocky Mountain spotted fever. The ones that we're really familiar with, Lyme disease wasn't discovered until 1983, I think it was. And now we're finding anaplasmosis and Borrelia mayani and Borrelia miyamotoi. So we just keep adding on to these tick-borne pathogens that we're familiar with. Some that are being transferred from other parts of the country as a result of climate change and different animals moving around. So we're learning more, we're seeing more of these diseases, and we're finding more ticks, and which is going to have an impact on which ones are going to be most dangerous for us. And the way this works, again, I'll go back to this life stage. You have the tick that's going to feed on the hosts, and if that host has the pathogen, then the larval tick is going to ingest it, and it's going to be in that body, and it's going to bring it along with it to the next life stage, which is the nymph. The nymph is now going to feed for a second time. If the host that it's feeding on doesn't have a pathogen, well, it is now, because the nymph is going to pass along that pathogen as it's feeding. If the first host didn't have a pathogen, then the second time that the host feeds, this is a second opportunity for that tick to pick up a pathogen that it can then pass on as an adult. So for the most part, the adults are more or twice as likely to be carrying a pathogen as the nymph. But we consider the nymph to be the most dangerous life stage because of its poppy seed size. And CDC information bears this out, that most people are going to be diagnosed with Lyme disease in June, July, based on ticks that fed on them in April, May, or June. So it's those poppy seed sized nymphs in the spring that we have to be most on the alert for, and to protect ourselves from, to make sure that we don't get these tick-borne diseases. And these tick-borne diseases are expanding at a very large rate. So on the left, we've got 2001. You can see it was a downstate issue moving up the Hudson Valley. In 2018, it's pretty much dispersed throughout all of New York State. I do like to point out that Massachusetts didn't figure out how to get rid of Lyme disease. They just started recording their information differently so that the CDC wouldn't accept it anymore. But you can consider all of Massachusetts to be completely blue with cases of Lyme disease. And the different ticks do transmit different pathogens. I saw our description, ticks are the dirty needles of nature, which is so true. These black-legged ticks carry the pathogens that cause Lyme disease, anaplasmosis, babesiosis, Powassan virus, Borrelia miyamotoi, and ehrlichiosis. Lone Star ticks can also transmit ehrlichiosis. The southern tick-associated rash illness, or STARI, we're actually not sure if that is a pathogen or if that is a reaction to one of the thousands of proteins that are in the tick's saliva. Also have canine ehrlichiosis and tularemia, and may or may not transmit Rocky Mountain spotted fever. In fact, there's some indication that it will transmit a milder form of it, which can then inoculate hosts against the more virulent strain of Rocky Mountain spotted fever, which is transmitted by the American dog tick. These are things we just don't know. In the lab, it was just discovered that Asian longhorn ticks can transmit Rocky Mountain spotted fever. We haven't seen any that are carrying Rocky Mountain spot, or the pathogen that causes Rocky Mountain spotted fever yet. but that's a possibility. We do know that in the United States, there are some that are carrying Theileria orientalis, which is a cattle disease, which is of great concern to farmers that have livestock at this point. There's also non-pathogenic impacts. So one is tick paralysis. So this, again, it's a reaction. Not everybody gets it. We don't know why, but it's a paralysis that starts at the toes and it works its way up the body. And if it's not caught, it actually can shut down the respiratory system. What's amazing about this is if it's recognized for what it is, you look, you find the tick, you remove the tick, and it is going to reverse the symptoms almost right away. It's just going to slowly deparalyze the body. So I like people just to be aware of tick paralysis. You could save somebody's life. And there's also the alpha-gal allergy. Right now, it's only associated with the Lone Star tick. Alpha-gal is a carbohydrate that is found in all mammals except for primates. So when the Lone Star tick injects this into people that are susceptible to that allergy, they then become allergic to this carbohydrate. And when they eat red meat, they can have an allergic reaction. So yet another reason not to get bit by a tick. I talked about how the bacteria works in the gut of the tick, where it sits there and it waits. Powassan virus actually is dispersed throughout the entire tick. So it doesn't need the tick to start feeding in order for it to start injecting the Powassan virus. So Powassan virus can be transmitted within minutes of the tick becoming attached. So another reason to not get bit by a tick. And these other tick-borne diseases are also spreading. So we've got anaplasmosis, definitely all up the eastern part of New York and working its way west. Babesiosis is working its way up. Babesiosis is similar to malaria. It's actually a parasite that gets inside of the blood cells, so it needs to be treated completely differently. Tularemia, ehrlichiosis is pretty rare in New York, and spotted fever, rickettsiosis, which is Rocky Mountain spotted fever, pretty rare in New York, but with the Lone Star tick and with the Asian longhorn tick possibly being able to spread that around through different hosts, we might see that really increase in the near future. And then Powassan virus, very, very rare. As you can see, throughout the United States, there was only 37 cases in 2019. The issue with Powassan virus is that it's not treatable except for supporting the body. And 11% of people that develop symptoms are going to die from Powassan virus. So transmitted almost immediately and is fatal. So don't get bit by a tick. Dress the part, wear repellents, Promethean-treated clothing. Ticks have preferred habitats. So different ticks are going to prefer to be in different areas. So the black-legged tick, as I mentioned, because they have that humidity requirement, we're most often going to find them in the woods or right along the edge of the woods. But we can find them in lawns, especially if they're very shady and get watered a lot and there's a heavy moisture load there, and there's lots of deer and mice and chipmunks around to carry them around. American dog ticks, you're most likely going to find those in those tall grass areas. The Lone Star ticks we're finding pretty much everywhere, and the Asian longhorn tick are also being found pretty much in all of these habitats. This is a field down on Long Island. It was an 80-degree day, which is not a great time to go tick collecting, but we found a lot of dog ticks and Lone Star ticks in this very sparsely, barely managed field. It was basically mowed. We did find quite a number of them. So hot and dry, it depends on the tick species. Basically, if you leave the pavement, you should be concerned about ticks. And speaking of pavement, this is a parking lot. This is a golf course in Rockland County. And to get to our car, we actually walked across this island here. And me and my coworker picked up about 40 Lone Star ticks each, just walking across that small grassy area in the middle of a parking lot. That island is not connected to the woods, but there's lots of deer going around, so they're getting dispersed. And again, if you're leaving the pavement, you need to consider ticks. And from a habitat standpoint, there's also been a very strong correlation between certain invasive plants and tick populations, most strongly with Japanese barberry, but also with multiflora rose and honeysuckle. And the theory behind that is that, especially with barberry, they create this nice, dense micro habitat, microclimate, where it's nice and moist under there. Because it's got the thorns on the branches, it's a great place for mice to be because it protects them from different predators, and they've got this natural food source. So we have found that not only in barberry infested forests are you going to find more ticks, but you're going to find way more ticks that are carrying the pathogen that causes Lyme disease, because you've got that high mouse population combined with a high tick population. So anything that we can do to reduce these invasive species invasions of our natural areas is going to have an impact on tick populations. All right, so when you're talking about personal protection, and habitat, the recommendation that you often hear is just to avoid areas that have ticks. Well, we're master naturalists, so we're not going to do that. We want to be where nature is. So there are certain things that we can do. So we can choose our trail. For example, the trail on the left, you're much less likely to brush up against vegetation, although this year all bets are off. I've spent more time off trail waiting for other hikers to pass by to make sure that I have that 6-foot gap between us. But I'm okay with doing that because when I go out into the woods, I'm wearing my permethrin treated clothing, and I know that probably other fellow hikers aren't. So I'm doing my part to protect them and me from COVID while also protecting myself against against ticks. So as we go to the left, as we go to the right, the trails become less and less likely to be completely protected by ticks, and we're more likely to brush up against vegetation. But that trail to the right goes to my favorite trout hole. So I am not going to not go on that trail. I'm going to take the precautions that I already talked about in terms of wearing the clothing, checking myself every 15 minutes while I'm on the trail, using different products to protect myself. And one of my favorite hobbies is spring ephemerals. So getting down on your stomach in the middle of the woods in springtime is the most tick risky activity that you can possibly do. And taking all of those precautions in place, I have not gotten a tick in the years since I've learned all of this, which is about 7 years now. So we can still do our master naturalist thing and still protect ourselves and not get bit by ticks and have these tick-borne diseases that we then need to deal with. I just want to mention this latest paper that came out in 2020. Somebody was looking at leaves and how leaf management impacts tick habitat. And they found that when you blow your leaves into the woodland edge, you can increase the number of ticks in that area by 3 times. So this is very timely information as we're thinking about what to do with our leaves. So getting in there and mulching them into the lawns, we believe, is going to be an effective way of dealing with your leaves without increasing tick populations. Leaving the leaves where they are and not piling them up, which is what caused the increase in the tick population, because now we have leaf litter that was maybe a few feet higher than it would have been naturally. Or actually, hauling them out composting them or bringing them to a compost facility so that the leaves are no longer on the property are going to be better options than raking or blowing them into your woodline edge.
Joellen, we have a question in the chat from Trix. She said, what does the Promethean, the chemical, do to the water when you wash your clothes in it?
So it is such an incredibly low population. One of the great things about permethrin is that it has an incredibly low, almost non-existent mammalian toxicity. And we're not finding it accumulating in water bodies, whether your wash is going out to a septic system or into a municipal system, where we're just not finding an increase in that. And it's just a little bit that's coming off at a time. It really, it has ingredients in there that really helps it lock into the fabric. So when you spray it on very lightly, you're just getting it to change, and that's slowly wearing off over 6 washes. We're not seeing impacts there. And when we measure different risks, so often I find I'm trying to convince mothers that putting permethrin treated clothing on their kids really is one of the best things that they can do. Even if they put the repellent on the kid before they go off to school, if it only lasts for 4 hours, by the time they get to lunchtime, it might not be working. So now we're talking about using these different chemicals contrasted to having to take an incredibly strong antibiotic that you ingest into your body, which also ends up getting released into your septic system or into the municipal system. So there's different risks to everything. For me, and what the research is showing is that permethrin is definitely the best way to protect yourself and your loved ones. Did that answer the question?
I think so. We have one more question, but we could also save it till the end if you have just a couple more
slides. I do. I'm almost done.
Okay, yeah, we'll keep that one for just the end.
When you get in, throw your clothes into the dryer. You don't want to wash. Ticks have been known to survive the wash cycle, and even when you put it into the dryer afterwards, there's enough moisture in that system for them to survive. So if you take your clothes, you put it directly into the dryer, that's going to kill them as long as it gets to 122 degrees. So you can figure out how hot your dryer gets by throwing in a bunch of towels, leaving it in for 15 minutes, and then using a meat thermometer to see what the temperature is. And now your clothes are in your dryer and you're naked. So this is the time to really check yourself for ticks. The best place to do this is in the shower, because you not only want to look with your eyes, but if you get your hands nice and soapy, it really helps to kind of feel around for ticks. So when you do this every single day, you get very good at knowing every freckle on your body and every skin tag, which is going to help you to be able to find those ticks that get on you in the future. And like I said, they prefer to be in these moist, darker areas. So those are the areas you want to concentrate on. And you need to do this every day. So even if you didn't go outside, still do your tick check. Just make it part of your routine. Because if you missed it every day as it's feeding, it's getting bigger and bigger and easier to find. And a large percentage of people that get Lyme disease did not know that they had a tick on them, because it started off as that poppy seed sized nymph. So even if you find it on day 4, which means that it's any pathogens it was carrying was going to be injected into your body, it's still better to know that and be able to provide that information to your doctor than to never know you had a tick. I just want to really quickly look at tick removal. We don't want to stress the tick out when we're removing it, because that stress causes it to salivate. And if we're right on the edge of when the parasite or the pathogens would start to get injected, or even all those thousands of proteins that we don't know what they do, you just don't want it in your body. So the best way is to use very pointy tweezers, tweezers that you would think if I was to try to get that on an airplane, they wouldn't allow me to, because it could be weaponized, but you can, I checked. You want to grab that, focusing more on the skin than on the tick itself. You want to make sure you're getting it right where the mouth part enters, and when you pull up, it's really going to lift your skin up because it's glued in there with those barbs, and it's finally going to release. And at that point, we recommend that you put it into alcohol or into a plastic bag and then put it into the freezer so that you can make sure that it's properly identified. Talked about before, the different tick species carry different diseases. So that's information that you can provide to your doctor. I would also encourage you, please, to consider downloading the Tick app. This is a citizen science project where they are tracking people's behavior on a daily basis. And they can also, if you get a tick, you can send pictures and they'll identify it for you. So it's helpful, it provides helpful information on how to prevent ticks. But that citizen science human behavior aspect is just, we have so many questions and you can help us to get those questions answered. So it's the Tick app, just go to your app store. So finally, you really just don't want to get bitten by a tick, but you can protect yourself with the methods that I talked about today. So please continue to go outside, but protect yourself and enjoy.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm so sorry not to cut you off if you wanted to talk on more.
No, that's okay. I do work for the Integrated Pest Management Program, and we have a Don't Get Ticked New York campaign. So if you want this information, you can go there, but of course you can always reach out to me if you have any questions.
Awesome. Thank you. So if people have questions, you can feel free to put them in the chat. There's also, I believe, a raise hand maybe function under participants, or you can just unmute yourself. But we have one question in the chat from earlier from Andrew that says, is it possible that the Japanese barberry really isn't a tick magnet, but simply the only plant left on the forest floor that deer don't browse, and then thus the only place where a tick can get any elevation in an attempt to touch a passerby?
That's an interesting idea, but they have definitely been associated with higher mouse populations as well. So it might be that it's a great place for the mice to be, and because it's a great place for the mice to be, that's where the ticks are going to be as well. And as the deer walk through those areas looking for something besides barberry to feed on, they'll be dropping off ticks that are then going to lay eggs.
Cool. And then we have another question from Andrew that says, if a tick has been saved in alcohol, what's the best way of getting an ID of that?
So you can go to the Tick app, take a good picture that you can then upload to there. Most cooperative extensions offices have people that will ID ticks, or you could send me a picture, or yeah, you could send me a picture. I'd be happy to look at that for you. The word is out in certain places. The health department, sometimes the county health department will sometimes do it, or they will send you to me.
Do we have any other questions? People can also feel free to unmute and just shout one out.
I'm looking at Adrian's question. I have not heard about ticks passing through digestive systems unharmed. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It's just not something that I have ever heard before. I will say about possums as well is that they have a lower body temperature. So we find that they don't get Lyme disease, and it might be because their temperature isn't high enough for the bacteria to be able to thrive in their bodies. The same reason we often don't see them with high rabies numbers. So possums are cool, but they're not going to save us from ticks.
Janice is asking to show the slide or the poster that shows the carriers in order, beginning with the mice, I think.
So
I think maybe the hosts of the ticks.
This one?
That works. Thanks.
And that also includes the paper if you're interested in looking that up.
Awesome. Do we have any other questions before we wrap things up? I believe that the recordings for the Naturalist Exchange get posted to a YouTube channel, and I think that those are public links, but you can double check with Christy. Since there was a question in the chat about that.
Well, thank you for your time. This is timely because we are about to enter into adult black-legged tick season. So as you're out there, as you are interacting with other people, there's just lots of questions that come up at this time of year.
Thank you very much, Joellen, for taking us through an awesome presentation. I'm sure, you know, I learned a lot and I'm sure everyone else also did. So thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
And hopefully we will see you all at the next Naturalist Exchange Zoom webinar. So thank you, everyone. I'm going to see if I can figure out how to pause.
Thank you. This was